Okay, this presentation is a continuation of the era of good feelings, and this will examine whether the era of good feelings should be known for being such a positive in American history, or is it actually a time period in American history in which a great divide or separation between the North and the South, and also other internal conflicts come about. Looking at diplomatic nationalism, we will focus specifically on John Quincy Adams' time as the Secretary of State, one of our finest Secretary of States in American history. Like his father, though unfortunately a very poor president, he faces a very difficult presidency, but he seems to be made for the position of Secretary of State due to many successes. So you'll notice the title there, A Bulldog Among Spaniels. John Quincy Adams, at the age of 19, was sent to Russia as a diplomat, so he has a wealth of early experiences with foreign affairs. So let's look at some of the things that John Quincy Adams is able to accomplish, which is going to help build nationalism throughout the country. Here is a slide that really presents and focuses his influence over our borders, which we are going to talk about the specifics of. You see Mexico, independent as of 1821, and British Canada, our neighbor to the north. Notice the dividing line from the Great Lakes at the 49th parallel over to the Oregon Territory, and then you'll focus on the fact that the Oregon Territory is disputed by both the British and the United States. One of the first things that John Quincy Adams does is sign the Rush-Bagot Agreement. The Rush-Bagot Agreement demilitarizes the border between the United States and British-controlled Canada. In other words, what they did was they took down a lot of their major forts along the Great Lakes and stopped patrolling the waters with large naval vessels. By doing so, it lessens the chance of the United States and the British having some sort of misunderstanding with this fortified border, and next thing you know, they wind up shooting at one another and a war breaks out. So the Rush-Bagot Agreement certainly results in a more peaceful border between the United States and British Canada. The Convention of 1818 is important, again, in solidifying our borders, that we are able to set the 49th parallel as the northern border from the Great Lakes over to the Oregon country. And it winds up becoming the longest unfortified border in the world. They also, in this agreement, basically decide that both the British and the United States will be able to occupy the Oregon Territory. That later will be dealt with. It will become a problem because they'll find the value in controlling that territory, that the United States is going to wind up wanting that land for themselves. But that won't be dealt with until the presidency of James K. Polk in the 1840s. So we still have a while until that's going to be confronted. I would really say from the Convention of 1818 on, this border between the United States and what becomes Canada is going to be a very peaceful one. It's not until 9/11 to where we decide to make some changes along our both northern and southern borders. Another thing John Quincy Adams is responsible for is the Adams-Onis Treaty, or otherwise known as the Florida Purchase Treaty in 1819. Primary reason why the United States was interested in purchasing Florida was because of problems in Georgia, where the Seminole Indians kept springing up across the border and attacking American holdings in Georgia. In fact, what happens is Jackson is sent down by President Monroe to get the situation under control, and Jackson then takes it upon himself to start attacking everyone in sight. So you could say that Jackson followed Monroe's orders in a very liberal fashion by taking matters into his own hands and attacking the natives. Again, another example of Jackson's hatred towards Native Americans. Florida at the time, this purchase, it's not considered a great purchase. Of course, Disney World did not exist yet. Virtually, Florida is a swampland from top to bottom, but now it's our swampland. So again, it helps with nationalism because it's a purchase of more territory, and it removes the Spanish influence along our borders, and now we can keep those Native Americans under control, whereas the Spanish did not. By far the biggest move of John Quincy Adams' time as Secretary of State under Monroe's presidency is the Monroe Doctrine. At this time, Napoleon is in exile in Europe. Europe is trying to reestablish its borders from control. So the European powers are trying to reestablish their borders. Napoleon has been sent away after his conquest of trying to take over almost all of Europe. The European leaders have a congress or a meeting in Vienna to restore the balance of power in the European borders. Many Latin American countries had gained their independence while Europe was dealing with trying to fight off Napoleon, and now the United States is a little worried about European powers regaining their focus on the Americas and trying to reestablish themselves. So as countries like Haiti had gained its independence in 1801, Mexico had gained its independence in 1821. By this time, it's pretty much a domino effect, one Latin American country after another. There was fear that the Europeans would try to swoop in and take control over the lands that had now gained their independence. So like the United States at one time being a young country trying to get a foothold and establishing themselves, the Latin American countries are now doing the same. So the U.S. under the Monroe Doctrine is going to be used as support to these young Latin American countries after they gain their independence. And really the principle of the doctrine is for the European countries to stay out of the West. Europe is their territory. They can stay over there as much as they want, and we will promise to try to stay out of their affairs as long as they promise to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. Did the United States have the military power to back this up? No, not really. I would say that between 1823 and the establishment of the Monroe Doctrine up until the turn of the century into the early 1900s, with the United States finally builds up its Navy with the Great White Fleet, during that roughly 80-year period, the British primarily are the military muscle that will support Monroe Doctrine with our positive relationship with England during that time period. Otherwise, we really didn't have the power and authority to back it up, but it's an example that shows that the United States is to be reckoned with and be respected, and that we're going to be the top dog in the Western Hemisphere. All right, let's move on to economic nationalism. The focus on economic nationalism is Henry Clay's American System. There are three parts to that plan: the Tariff of 1816, the Second National Bank of the United States, and internal improvements at federal expense. Again, with the tariff is going to protect American industry in the North. So, in New England, they're really going to love it. The South is going to hate it. The Second National Bank is the engine that makes the economy go, and again, most of the money is tied up in New England, so you could make the argument that the South is not going to be too pleased with that as well. And then the internal improvements, the debate is going to become who should pay for it. Should it be individual states? Should it be the entire nation? So the South is not going to be happy with some of these proposals on internal improvements. This is a time period in which you see a canal boom take place in the United States, starting with the most famous, the Erie Canal, that tied Lake Erie to the Hudson River down through New York and out to the Atlantic. As a result of the building of the Erie Canal, that was paid for, by the way, by state dollars, not federal dollars, the city of New York is going to flourish during this time period. Other internal improvements are under the American system is the Pennsylvania Turnpike and the National Road, which we'll see here shortly. So a series of canals to help link the West to the East, and also to link the economy as a whole. And here is the first turnpike, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 1790, but you'll notice the caption there, by 1832, nearly 2,400 miles of roads connected most major cities. And again, we've already talked about the National Road, which began in 1811. It certainly is a dividing argument, though, that we should not be paying for a road with national dollars, that each individual state that's affected by it should be the ones paying the bill. And here's the effect of the Erie Canal and the canal system that develops. You can see that it connects the Great Lakes to the Hudson, which then connects it to the Atlantic Ocean. And here's the Erie Canal, 1820s. Erie Canal, as it develops over time, 1907, and then here is a more modern picture of the canal. So the question is of these economic things, were these economic things, did they result in sectionalism? So when you look at the American system, the West gets roads, canals, and federal aid. The East gets the backing of protective tariffs. And what does the South get? Well, they would argue that they get to help pay the bill for the improvements that are made in the North. Here's a political cartoon that shows the monkey system, or the every man for himself at the expense of his neighbor system. So this is a knocking on Henry Clay's American system. So it really is an era of good or bad feelings. Economically, this is where you see the first panic in American history. That takes place in 1819 as a result of over-speculation of land. Too much credit being given, and people not being able to pay off loans, and also not being able to sell the land that they purchased. By this time, cotton is starting to become king in the South, and cotton prices are going to collapse, which is going to hurt the farming industry, the farming across the country. The Missouri question is a very dividing question as well. People are moving to Louisiana Territory. They are going to apply for statehood, and Missouri is going to wind up asking to become a state. The question is, should it be a slave or a free state? At the time, there was an equal balance. So as you can see in this quote, that Thomas Jefferson feels that this issue is going to tear the country apart. We have a wolf by its ears, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. In anticipation that the Missouri Compromise was going to be passed, the Talmadge Amendment went through Congress and basically established that all slaves born in Missouri after the territory became a state would be freed at the age of 25. So there was a way in which you could eventually gain your freedom as a slave. It was passed in the House but not in the Senate. As you can see here, the North controlled the House and the South had enough power to block the passage of this bill in the Senate. So the compromise, of course, is the Missouri Compromise of 1820, and that is that Maine will become a free state, formerly part of Massachusetts, and Missouri will become a slave state, and that any territory to the west and the unorganized Louisiana Purchase area, based on the Mason-Dixon line, above that line will be free, and below that line will be slave. Henry Clay is known as the Great Compromiser as a result of his efforts in resolving this issue. He's also going to be involved to some degree, well, I shouldn't say some degree, he's going to be majorly involved in the Compromise of 1850 as well. So here is, to finish up kind of this feeling of delaying the inevitable. John Quincy Adams, this is his opinion. And if we would have gone to a civil war between the North and the South in 1820, the South probably would have won because the population was fairly even. By 1860, the North has so much immigration that they have a huge population advantage, and that's what they use ultimately to be able to win the Civil War. So again, looking at this lesson, this information, the evaluation, the importance is to be able to evaluate whether it truly was an era of good feelings, or is there enough evidence to support the idea that the country was growing with this increasing feeling of sectionalism.